You know, we're at August 21st right now. Our season in Kentucky starts 2 weeks from Saturday. So we're 16 days in counting. I can't wait. And we're getting ready for that, as you are too. And you're looking at your trail cameras. Some of you seen giant bucks, some of you aren't. You get questions all the time when you go to clients. I talk about that whitetail shift have for a very, very long time. And, you know, when are those bucks going to shift? Well, it depends on your area, because depending on your area, those bikes might already be there and they're going to probably stay there. That's a small percentage. And some of those bucks aren't typically going to shift until later in the season, November, late October, December. And there's really good reasons why. So I want to help you analyze your property and really take a good hard look at, you know, really when is this location? When are those bucks going to shift? And so I'm looking at, if you're in that small parcel, small cover, big ag area, say when are those bucks going to shift? I'm talking when there's 20, 30, 40, 50 acres or less per section of land. You know, I'm thinking Northern Ohio, some of those areas. It's really different there because you'll have bucks that literally are packed in to a given area, and they're packed into that area because there's a limit of cover. There's a limited amount of cover. So sometimes they're not shifting. And so they have to be in this location. They're confined to this habitat because they don't have a choice. And in some of those areas, you'll see random rock pile out in the middle of the fields. There's a monster living out there because he has his own spot. If he can't find a location like that, then he's left to go into that 20 acres with the other 38 deer in the area and find a corner somewhere where he can call his own and stay in that spot. So that's a little bit different, because you might find that those bucks that are here today during the summer are here to stay because they don't have a choice. That's not like most of you out there. And so you really have to take a look at, we have the luxury of looking at wilderness parcels, big woods, doesn't matter if it's big woods, Kentucky or northern Minnesota, Mississippi big woods. We get to see a lot of different types of habitat. And when you do, you find out that there's always a balance. There's always a concept that applies everywhere, but you have to understand the balance of that concept that goes with that whitetail shift too. So you look at when those deer don't have a choice, they're going to stay in that spot. They're going to be locked in, and they might not move all year because they don't have a choice. Now you get into this mid-ag area here, right here. So different, because bucks have the opportunity to stay next to a bean field, next to a hay field, next to a continually cut alfalfa field where they have great food, and then they can go back on some knoll that's shaded and sit back there and enjoy it. In this type of area, it's all about that food source, and it's about their cover too. So you look at it twofold. If that food source are beans, and you have big food sources around the area, corn, alfalfa, beans, you know, typical cash crop area, then what you find is those beans turn brown. You get that last cutting of hay sometime in early September, mid-September, and a buck, because he has a home range 5 times greater than a doe, he's willing to go find where the fall food source is, and he wants that thick cover. So it's twofold with that cover too, and he'll move. When does that happen? Typically in September, but it could happen as late as October, even late October. So we see bucks out here that, now maybe that buck is staying in a location where he's got some beans and corn, but it's open hardwoods. Pretty decent. You know, he doesn't mind, but all of a sudden it starts getting cold. He wants that thermal protection. He wants some stem count during the day because the food supplies are limited, because the weeds keep turning brown. There's really not much forage available unless he has high regen, woody browse, shrub tips, that type of thing. And then you get into late October and people start applying hunting pressure. So his cover choices are dwindling, maybe hunting pressure, maybe the availability of browse combined. And then those food sources are shrinking too in the form of beans. And then you're kind of left in that awkward stage of beans are brown. They're not hitting that. Now, some places where they're overrun with deer, there's not a lot of cover food sources. They'll eat those beans really hard when they're brown. And that tells you a little bit about the lack of food in the area and the number of deer. So you have some signs like that you can read. But traditionally in our area, we're looking, if it's more food related, it's going to be in September. If it's more cover related, sometime end of October, early November. And then you have in between like that. just sorry to interrupt, but I really like you guys to know when some of our partners have some of the biggest sales of the year, and First Lite is having one of those right now, up to 40% off. Great time for early season. Trace pants are in there, one of my favorites for the early season, so check out what they have available. Didn't want you guys to miss out. Now back to the program. And that brings like big woods area. Maybe you're in the big woods in Kentucky, Louisiana, maybe you're up north somewhere. Big woods are a little bit unique because if they're in a location, and in big woods, you find mature bucks move a lot further. You know, here it might have a home range of 3 square miles. Ag land, it could be really small little postage size patches of cover that they rarely ever leave. Maybe they go over a mile over there, a mile over there. But for the most part, they stay really confined. But in a big woods, those deer are moving a long ways. What I find when they're moving a long ways, there's a lot of habitat they go through. There's a lot of cover options, maybe big federal land, state land holdings. They have clear cuts here, they have clear cuts there. And so what I find is food sources are kind of broad and similar all across a large range unless you have food plots. But even if you have food plots, that buck that you're seeing in November, December might be coming from 4 miles away. Yeah, you see him every year. He doesn't come to them because he's totally locked in the fall somewhere else. And a lot of times they're moving in those big wilderness areas up north, at least, because of the shrinking supply of good winter survival and thermal protection cover. So up by us, we'd see some bucks roll through in the UP of Michigan when I was there in December and even January. Yeah, that's that buck from last year, and he's moving on us because he's on the way to thermal protection somewhere in the form of those deer yards. So in there, certain bucks, we'd see a quote shift, but it was more related to cover and wintertime movement. And then you get in those big woods areas, down south, Louisiana, wherever it might be. Again, it's focusing on food supply. So you might have a buck in a big wood setting that doesn't move in on you until November, December, because weeds are staying greener longer. Their fall habitat continues longer than it does up here in the north. And so because it's staying longer, they shift at a later time, and that shift could be a lot later. I'm just trying to explain this whitetail shift to you because we all hunt and live in different areas. And I know when I go out to Pennsylvania hunting public land, for example, there's areas we hunt on some of those ridge tops that have traditional scraping areas. When we walked in last year, there's a real nice scrape. You see rubs on the way in. A lot of times those deer, by experience, because we used to shine and drive at night, are down by the roads because that's where the apple trees are. That's where the old homesteads are. That's where a lot of creek systems are. It seems like the roads weren't put through the big open tops unless they had to. They're down in the valleys and sides. So you get into some lower quality or lower habitat, which had to do with streams, rivers, creeks. And when you have that, then you have a diversity of habitat. So you find that those deer are related to those areas right up until the season begins. Start getting a lot of traffic, people going back out in the woods. So by the time we're there, the end of November for that rifle opener, those bucks are really pushed back into the hillsides, away from the campgrounds, away from the parking areas, away from the roads. And we're trying to find those central hubs of movement. And in that case, those bucks are moving a really long time, but they're not getting into those rut areas until that time. And that was the same in the UP of Michigan. Go out into some of those swamps that were my favorite preferred areas to hunt. I wouldn't even see a rubber scrape until sometime in November. And it wasn't because they weren't making them. It was just because they weren't pushed to that area until that time. They're up in the hardwoods around people's camps. They're getting fed. As soon as people start coming in, the small game hunters come in September, and then people are coming up to their camps to start baiting for deer, and those deer start moving out to those areas. So when do they shift? Average area, like out here, we're waiting for that September to October shift. And this is a spot that's a great example. A spot I can't wait to hunt later in the year. And we have a camera right here, and we have the mock scrape right here. And this is full of bucks when we get in, good bucks, once we get into late September, October. We're August 21st right now. This is not the time that they'll shift. However, we like putting the camera here and waiting for that shift, because sometimes you get that random buck that shows up end of August, September. He's not going to lock in here till end of September, October. We get to take advantage of being able to see that. And it just teaches you more about the habitat when that shift is. So we have plenty that we're waiting for to show up in this area. Even trouble. He's a lower quality antlered buck, but he's a big bodied, pretty cool, wide, low racked 8-point, low brow tines. And we've gotten 1 or 2 glimpses of him this year. But when he locks in, he'll start coming here in October. We think he's a bully buck. So we'll see how that translates into who and when we shoot him this year, if we do. But he's one we're waiting on. We'll get to see him. But again, it tells you a little bit about mature buck behavior and that habitat. And this is a really good spot for us to locate those bucks, because right now they're just not in this area. But soon, just a few weeks to come, they will be. And that'll teach us even more about that whitetail shift we're continuing to learn each and every season.